Awesome. Okay, so does everyone have the here? I'll drop the agenda in the chat as well. The main purpose really is as we were just saying, to like just figure out what's our goal for the next year. What do we we kind of spun up really quickly at the end of 2016 and have been kind of chugging along since then. And so just kind of thinking through, given who we are and where we are now, what do we want to do, and what steps we want to take. And so I figure this will kind of go in kind of three parts this meeting. The first is kind of identifying our strengths. What do we do well? Like, what do we do uniquely? Kind of, if we fill a niche in this world, and that really has our place. And then, kind of given those strengths, and potential opportunities that we see on the horizon, what do we want to accomplish in the next 2 years? If we want to think on that time scale, on the next year, if we want to think on that time scale, and then spend some time thinking about like how exactly we'll go about accomplishing that. Is kind of the plan for today. So 2 questions that I want just to kind of give us a warm up for everyone to think on. One, what is your favorite thing about Edu web monitoring? And that can be kind of in terms of like, us, or it can be in terms of like what we, who we are, what we do, what the impact of our work in, like wherever wherever your thought takes you on what's your very favorite thing. And then also what we do uniquely. And I'll ask for popcorn answers after that. Yeah, Rob?
I guess for me, my favorite thing is that it's a project I can see the immediate results of, and that many people around me who have nothing to do with it see the immediate results of. When people ask me about it, I can say, oh, that story you saw in the paper, that was the result of our work. So to me, that's probably one of the big things, is that people can immediately see the value of the work, or at least that it is very visible.
Marcy, I was going to say something along those lines too, but in addition, and thank you, Rob. I guess for me, it's uncovering and reporting on intentional changes that we see to websites that could reflect, anticipate, or speak to administrative policies and priorities. So that's what floats my boat.
I would agree with both of those points, which are more about the substance of what we do, and which is clearly super important. So I would agree, but not to duplicate that. I would say also, yeah, us, right? As you mentioned, Gretchen, like the fact that there's a sizable group of us, and that although maybe we don't get together every week, all of us, we do get together frequently, and I've seen the same faces for the past year or so now. I mean, there's new faces too, but the fact that many of us has stuck it out for a year plus is really something unique, but also something I really value. And it's not just we're not just one kind of people, right? I mean, the fact that, I get to, talk with programmers and people who really know the technical stuff, but also talk to, people who are more familiar with the reporting side of things, like the fact that we all have different kinds of backgrounds and expertise to lend to this endeavor is really, really great.
Yeah, I would just add to that point that it's good to see people as they develop in their personal lives as well. So over the course of the year, I think a bunch of us have taken on new jobs and, had children and things like that. So it's good to see people advancing in their life.
And I guess I just, Eric's answer made me think the thing I'd want to add in like what makes us unique is I think we may be the only group of people doing this kind of work at anything approaching this scale. Which, not that we're doing it at some obscenely huge scale, but I don't know of anybody who's doing it at anything greater than the scale of like, oh, I'm paying attention to these like 5 or 10 pages, and doing it in a systematic way, which is unique. And it also means that probably we have a lot we can both teach and build for other people. I know like back in early 2017, there were folks from Poland who were interested, but I think everything was still much too unwieldy then. I'm not sure that we've gotten it a whole lot better, but like there's something there.
Building on what everybody's already said, I guess this could be a two-edged sword, but unlike other parts of EDGI, there's no sort of a direct provenance line to an academic, to sort of academic research or departments. And so that makes us unique. And also I think has done a lot in terms of opening up, welcoming people from a whole diverse group of backgrounds to participate as well. But it also is potentially a challenge moving forward, just in terms of that sort of constancy or rudder or keel that people can fall back on or bring to the table.
I think on that point, what makes us different within EDGI that's come up a couple times is we have a way different time scale. We're not generating reports every 6 months, right? And we're also much more expensive.
Yeah. But we also don't have academic salaries to fall back on to help fund something. So I think, there are a whole bunch of in-kind costs that are probably not reflected in the overall EDGI budget that are coming from the other areas.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's really good point there.
I mean, for what it's worth, that does also reflect a little bit on the uniqueness, right? Like there are somewhat commodity tools that interviewing can use that they just don't exist for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what Rob was saying, that we can't use existing tools, is kind of what makes it cool. Like it's interesting for me in the web monitoring meetings to have the people there who are developing the tools that we're using. So we're really immediately like developing exactly what we want. I mean, you guys are developing exactly what we want. And it's like fun to be on that dynamic of, I don't know if frontier is like an over dramatic word, but it's cool to be like working on a problem and also creating the tools to address the problem. Like that's what I like about my research job, and that's reflected here too.
I think that's a really good point, Liz. And I think maybe it's sort of when I joined EDGI, but I didn't have an appreciation initially of the fact that our work was really being, as a test bed for what the dev folks are working on as well. And I think that's really rewarding as well.
I think this is something that Rob and I were talking about just a couple days ago. When we started doing this, we kind of assumed that eventually we'd find someone out there who was doing at least major pieces of this better than us. And I'm not saying that couldn't happen, but we're getting more and more evidence that this particular feedback loop between humans committed to reviewing changes over a long period of time is feeding back into, technical tools that maybe never have been built before. Is Gretchen talking?
Gretchen, you're muted.
Sorry. I was just saying that I think what I think is so unique is that I don't know that the people have been systematically looking at how the government presents information in kind of more broadly in such a systematic way. Also, I thinking about like if we want to do any sort of like adding elements to our analysis about just kind of like more the words on the page, not just like how something's changed, but also kind of like what's there as a base to change from. I just think if we decide to do that or not, I think it's just really interesting to watch how our government decides to present information to the public about things that are, such great consequence as the environment that we all live in.
I mean, not that this is especially relevant, but I think that Eric posted a bunch of like related academic articles. So although Marcy mentioned that we do not have really an academic home, that is like one candidate academic area that our work could inform or interact with. Eric, am I remembering correctly that you know of references for like historical studies of how the government presents environmental information?
Maybe you have to leave for a little bit. That sounds right to me.
Yeah, I recall him posting some stuff like that. Now I feel like I should have paid closer attention to it, though.
Okay, so these are all excellent strengths that we've highlighted. Are there strengths we have that aren't, that we haven't immediately listed, just kind of in thinking of our favorite things and our unique things? Are there other things that, that really make us a good team? Or skills in, kind of us specifically, or also thinking about an edging more broadly that we could kind of utilize?
In terms of a team, I realized that I haven't been able to attend the recently rescheduled meetings, but I assume that this is still the case, that it's a very healthy team. There's interpersonally, there's just a lot of really good communication, a lot of respect for people's strengths, and understanding about any weaknesses, and a sense of camaraderie that helps people not only work together effectively, but probably helps with retention in terms of group membership. And that makes the rest of all the work possible. So I think that that's, comes from members and is also modeled from the top down, and just like to acknowledge that as being important, though perhaps not necessarily super visible part of what goes on.
Totally agreed. One thing that I think is a strength within Edgy that I think could be tapped more is kind of extensive expertise in environmental history, environmental policies, environmental regulations, and environmental science. I think we do have a lot of like that kind of subject matter expertise throughout Edgy. Okay, does anyone want to summarize kind of, do people feel like there are kind of like orbs of things that we've kind of honed in on some of the strengths of what we do and how we do it? No takers?
I don't think I understand that question, Gretchen. Could you try rephrasing?
Yeah. I just want us to be able to kind of use what we've discussed in our strengths to then start kind of launching into what we want to accomplish. So we can think about leveraging our strengths in order to accomplish those things. And so just kind of summarizing, like some of the patterns that I heard come out were that, you know, kind of that we have a lot of different perspectives, and it's not necessarily like, you know, just like one, you know, one type of person, but we have this kind of like interesting intersection that we're all working toward, or interesting intersection where we're all working. And I want to apologize. I'm taking notes while also facilitating. So if I seem a little like off a beat, sorry.
Gretchen, I can take notes instead if you just want to facilitate.
That would be awesome. Thanks, Liz. Well, so a couple of ones that jumped out at me were, so again, that were kind of like a diverse group of people, you know, coming together to address, you know, address this issue, and that, you know, it's, I think, you know, one of the things that is unique and a strength is that we're like, you know, building the ship as we're sailing it, and that, you know, of course has its hiccups, but also means that it's very nimble, and that I think we can, you know, we can really like, you know, navigate how we want to, because we're in this whole process, and that certainly no one else is doing this work, so we're not going to get like out, you know, outcompeted for it. So I think that all of that is really good to, you know.
Building the ship as we're sailing it is a nice version of that metaphor. I usually hear knitting the parachute while you're falling off the cliff. Yours is a lot more serene. I don't know which one we're in. I think if we were going to like summarize this around big areas, what jumps out to me is diversity, which has come up many times, but the sustained volunteer commitment from a diverse group of people, and to re-up Rob's point, operating at a special scale. It's neither the Internet Archive scale, where there's certain things that you just can't do, right? Nor the I'm a reporter and I watch these specific pages scale, something in between. And wrapping all that up, I think, you know, it all comes back to the people and what they're doing. And just buying time here, buying time.
You're doing a great job.
Okay, so, and another thing that I think that I appreciate that Rob pointed out in the very beginning is the kind of, kind of, and that Dan also mentioned is kind of the shorter time scale of, not necessarily well, in some components, we are, kind of building on this long time scale and, doing analyses that we expect to take a long time in order to, produce a larger synthesis. But then also some things are just kind of like quick and responsive. And I think that kind of diversity of output is actually really a strength as well. Kind of keeps things interesting, but also, has enough focus to really do some like interesting and nuanced work. Okay, so let's shift gears to what we want to accomplish in this next couple of years. So the first little, kind of thought, brain teaser here is, okay, so imagine it's November 2020, and, potentially or hopefully really impactful election will have just occurred or is on the brink of occurring. And, you've been in web monitoring this whole time and you felt it's been really worthwhile. When you think about that and you say by November 2020, we will have what will we have done if on the cusp of that next election, you're feeling like really good about the time you spent in EDGI? Yeah, Eric?
So I'm just going to wing some things together, but, building off our previous discussion, first, I think if it's November 2020, by then, I think we will have all been here still, hopefully, right? Many of us have been here for a year plus. Why not for another couple of years building this thing together? Secondly, that our tools have really stabilized and maybe been used by others. We've been able to demonstrate to others their real utility, and they've been successful. And then just in terms of the substance of what we're monitoring, I think that, maybe this is ambitious, I don't know, but that we will have continued to document significant changes in environmental federal agencies' websites, to contextualize them within broader policy changes, to synthesize them, and to make them, in collaboration with reporters, to make them make those changes more broadly known and something that people will understand, and something that they can latch on to. Whether our work directly has any sort of real political outcome, I don't know, but I think we can have a goal of documenting and making intelligible to the best that we can those changes. And
Yeah, I think related to what Eric was saying about making changes broadly known and understood, and also related to what we were saying about the presentation of environmental information on government websites, because my involvement with EDGI started from managing students' involvement with EDGI, I think that by November 2020, it would be great to have contributed substantially to young people's understanding of how environmental information is presented. So contribute substantially to young people's environmental literacy.
I think that's a great goal. Go ahead, Dan.
I guess I'll build on Eric's point about looking forward to seeing other people using the tool. I think that would be, an essential thing, but it would be a really encouraging thing for other people to either be using our deployment for looking at a different subset of pages or running their own. I think it would be a nice validation of it. I also want to think about what I'd like us to be able to do with the tool by 2020, not just looking at page by page, with increasing automation maybe, but starting to do things that I know the Web Monitoring Research Group is looking at, producing conclusions in the aggregate and finding a way to actually tell a story around that that's well backed up and the kind of thing that you could place on a news hook. I think we're sort of in the exploratory phase right now, but as the tool stabilizes and we can do more and more rich things on top of it, I want to see us telling a story about the connectivity of resources across sites in a way that's not just kind of a neat trick, but actually lets you learn something. And that seems hard, but maybe doable by that time scale.
That's great, Dan. This is something that we've talked about in research group a little, and I've talked about with Toli as well. So there's this sort of ideal that I have, which is thinking about how what we're putting together can be of use to change administration in terms of restoration of what has been removed, excised, changed, and thinking about how we might structure our output or to fit a sort of restoration. I think we've used the word restoration, sort of a restoration kind of outcome or output.
So just point of clarification, does that mean if people come in who want to put things back the way they were, like make it technically easy for them to do that?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, and it's, things obviously are changing all the time, so it would be naive to assume they would want to put everything back as they were, but also to have this understanding of what has been excised in terms of language, content, and access that they could make use of, hopefully, without starting from scratch.
I have a thought, along that line as well of, I'd be really proud if we, we'll have provided an avenue for the public to understand or to learn about and understand how, kind of how different administrations can shift the public presentation and thus the public understanding of different issues, in hopes that people could then also be aware for the future and kind of, take things a little bit with a grain of salt and the, kind of understanding what other, avenues they might need to go down to find information, because it might be, might have been changed from what, the exact same data, but presented in a different light, under a different political administration. So I think just, providing that synthesis that people have an idea of just like, in nuanced ways or not, how much, oh, great. How things have changed. Eric, you had your hand up?
Yeah, just kind of building off the past 2 points, but this might be a little too specific, but I would at some point like to use our resources to show what hasn't changed, and for whatever reason it hasn't changed, what's still available. There are risks in maybe highlighting certain things that are trying to fly above the radar, but for me the message, the story there is like, not all hope is lost, and there are some things they can't touch, or so in the genre of heartwarming activities, that might be a good one.
To follow up on what Gretchen and perhaps some others have said, I think and goes back to one of the strengths, the importance of sort of documenting things and having a record of what's changed is really important, because I think it's very easy for when language shifts, when terms or regulations or whatever the content may be disappears, it's very easy for people to acclimate and sort of continue to acclimate to what becomes a new normal and then another new normal. And it's very easy to forget that things were actually different before. And so the fact of keeping a record and how that record is presented is evolving. But thinking ahead to 2020, I think that that's really powerful, for us in terms of our leadership or our country, but also thinking ahead to other people who might be interested in it. There's a lot of other precarious regime situations that are making radical changes to their court systems or judicial systems or other systems that other people might be interested in implementing this platform to do similar sort of watchdog type work. And I think that would be really, really cool, because at the end of the day, if we have a record, I think that, and of course I work in a library, so I'm very attuned to that. But to me, it's important to track that, and that's a value we can definitely add.
Yeah, Rob?
And to tag on to that, I would be very proud or excited, not just if other people were really interested or even actively using our tools, but if we were able to provide a public data set that is useful to other people. Somebody felt like if we were able to provide it as open data, not just like all our scrapes of pages, but our analysis and what we've seen about them, and that somebody felt that was worthwhile to do other research on, that it wasn't just us making use of the data we're producing.
To build on that, it reminds me of the first interaction that I had with Edgy at the event at UPenn, and Michelle came down, with a warning from Canada, basically, and then pictures of dumpsters full of scientific journals, and that had a really strong effect on me of like, is this a real thing? And probably is a big part of why I stayed involved. And it would be interesting if we could go to, wherever this strikes next, where there's concern of, doing Angela Merkel's end of term crawl or something, and come not just with a warning, but with data and with a sense of where things tend to vanish first. That would be really cool.
So how about by 2019, in the next year, what do we want to do to like work toward these really awesome and really, I feel like a lot of us have, there's a lot of energy synthesis, kind of synergy around kind of common goals.
Technically, be done with Versionista, which is going to happen budget-wise, whether we want it to or not, and get rid of Google Docs, like fully on Scanner and Scanner running smoothly. If we get that by the end of 2019, I'm happy.
I'd say also, like, back to that point in 2020 about having other people interested in using our data, is by the end of 2019 having it out there in some form where it's not all at least completely behind a login, and that there's a huge amount of rigor before somebody can even sort of see what we're doing other than the reports we produce at the end.
I think by 2019, that we'll be in a place where we can actually, do that kind of analysis and get our data ready to be put out there using our tools, right? So a kind of 2-year reflection. Halfway through this administration, what have we seen in the aggregate? What does that look like, and what do we need to do going forward? I think that kind of analysis and report, it may not be perfect depending on how far we get with everything, our analysis and the tools and whatnot, but it would at least be a test run for 2020 where maybe we can be a bit more definitive. But I do think it's possible for 2019.
Yeah, Rob?
And just at a very tool-focused level, I would be very happy and excited if everybody on the analyst team felt like they were able to do somewhere upward, at least twice as much work with the same amount of time, because the tooling does do a good job of prioritizing and analyzing or giving you the right visualizations, or you don't have to flip back and forth between tools or whatever. But like all of those things together, that people can really say that they honestly feel like we are able to do drastically more because of what we've built.
Thank you, Rob. Totally agree.
I agree with everything that's been said. And in addition to having our work kind of out there, in terms of like a database that other people could, including our annotations and that database out there, also our own syntheses of both kind of the term count, but also the an analysis of, from all of our important changes, how many were how many significant changes were because of a language change versus a content change versus an access change, and what topics were changed the most, what are just that kind of within a domain, across domains, just those sorts of syntheses. And I think a couple of case studies to kind of look more broadly or more deeply, at for this specific situation, this is how all of these web pages around it have changed or not changed, with given policy, new regulations or proposed regulations or any of that. I think kind of going deeply into the all of the information online about it, and how that's changed. Sorry, muted. For anyone who hasn't spoken yet, are there things that that you want to name about, by 2019 you'd be really proud to have accomplished collectively? So something that is notably absent in my mind, although it's something that I am interested in as well, we haven't mentioned specific reports. We've talked a lot about getting all the annotations out there and some syntheses, but we haven't mentioned specific reports a whole lot. Yeah, Eric?
You mean what specific reports we'd like to write?
Or just reports as a dissemination form that we prioritize.
I mean, because, you know, a kind of 2-year report, I think would be, it doesn't have to be right at 2 years probably, but, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the same kind of thing as the 100 days report, but I think that would be a good hook for putting everything together that we've done so far in a way that also pushes us forward.
Mm-hmm.
One specific thing with that, I assume on the website we have a list of all the press that we've generated.
Mm-hmm.
That must exist. It would be nice from an open data point of view, you know, thinking about how BuzzFeed releases their Jupyter notebooks now and stuff. If we could put a changes link to every one of those articles, new and old, eventually, that would be a cool research resource for people. That predicated on the idea that the app itself eventually becomes open.
Can you say a little bit more about what that means? I don't quite
Yeah,
understand.
sorry. So like when you know, when we put out, or when an article comes out about a specific change, we could publish our, you know, our work, basically, including a link to in Scanner where you can see the before and after of the change, and maybe some documentation. You know, if the change is based on the kinds of things that Eric and the web research group is doing, then there might be some additional code related to understanding the change, if it was a change that was aggregate across many pages or something like that. But I guess just to start, for all the old press releases that we have, making sure that we have a centralized list of what that change was, you know, in Scanner.
Nice.
This is on my brain, I'll just say, because The Economist just started doing this. They're putting out all their code behind their articles now.
That's really neat. So, so where do people see areas of overlap between our, like, it feels like there is a lot of, you know, a lot of synergy, but do people also feel that way about, like, we've named a couple of, like, ideally we'd come out of this with saying, like, you know, for 2019 we've got, like, you know, these, like, couple of goals, like, you know, maybe like 3 at most, kind of whole team goals. Do people feel like we started to enumerate them? Yeah, Eric?
I can do 3, just based on what we've talked about so far. And the first is sticking together, right? So again, coming back to the question of us, like sustaining our own commitments to this. And we could also talk about new recruitment too. The second would be stepping back and synthesizing. So Gretchen, you asked a lot of questions just now that were around, like, how many important changes have we seen? What kinds of agencies? What kinds of topics? So on and so forth. That seemed like really basic questions that I don't know if I could give an adequate answer to those right now, but they seem really important. And so finding the time to actually do that work and come up with those numbers and come up with those answers, I think is really important. And, you know, that also includes, like, you know, aggregate changes, that kind of research work. And then third is the tool, right? And coming to a happy place with Scanner. And that's what I see.
I think to Eric's last point, we should connect that to Rob's point about making the analysts more efficient. That's the thing that we can all get around, not just like, yeah, we really hope the tool keeps getting better, but the goal is keeping an eye on how many changes per week you guys can look at. Do we actually put that down somewhere? I know we could always, like, retroactively figure it out from sheets, but if our goal is to show that we're twice as efficient by the end of the year, is there anything we can do to make that calculation easier to perform?
Yeah, I guess it kind of depends on I think let's follow up on that. I think it would be like pretty easy to document as we go. We're already document some of that, and it just kind of be, yeah, I think that'd be pretty easy to do. Yeah, Rob?
I feel like there was a broad theme in making our data accessible, whether that's by making the system more open, or by connecting lists of changes that people can pull data on directly to the actual reports, or providing more synthesized like data focused things rather than the more anecdotal narrative sort of reports that we write. But this sort of like making the data that we have more accessible.
I just wanted to add to that, to what Rob said. Like, I know we're pretty far from allowing the public to use the scanner, but like having a public demo, just being able to show people what it is without feeling like afraid to show people things, I would want to be able to do that. Just be able to show people the scanner.
And to that, like, also to kind of, I have been kind of playing with the idea of like, why, if we need to have so much scrutiny around, or, so many, so much technical review of of changes, and if it would be, if it would be possible to just kind of like, share changes that haven't necessarily gone through a whole report, or kind of like the one that Eric just found. Like, we could go through the whole like report writing process, but also just be like, hey, look, this is different, and kind of if there's something to be, I think there's something to be said for both, for like the rigor, but also for the like just kind of getting it out into the world, in that balance.
So I think this is something that we might want to think about at a time when we have more than 8 minutes to do so. Or, maybe y'all have more than 8 minutes to do so right now. I don't know. But for me, I think that the report process actually is a major part of the value that we can add to the public conversation. I think there's quite enough shouty stuff in the press of like, hey, this thing happened. Here's no analysis about it. Come to your own conclusion. Which like has its place, but I don't think that that is our niche. But this is my personal perspective.
Very good point. Totally. Great point.
This is also I think a whole other part of our discussion that, but it has to do with what we're seeing in terms of the volume of changes, and to the extent those are like, at the moment they seem to be down, and what significant ones will be emerging that would warrant report preparation, and to what extent we also might want to start moving a little into proactive searches, that we have not been doing to date. And I realize, there's this line which Liz is I'm sort of alluding to, I mean, in terms of the objectivity, and, we're bumping into these things. We're not coming with an agenda, so to speak, overtly. But I know we've talked about this in the research group as well. So I just want to put that out there.
Okay, so I agree with the what Eric said, kind of, it sounds like, you know, some goals are keeping us in a you know, kind of diverse group, you know, working together on these things, to get more syntheses out there, more analysis, not and definitely not just not just a hey, this thing happened, without an analysis, but uh, and to make both the tool and the data more open. Um, um, I also, so those sound like pretty great goals. And I wonder, so we only have 5 minutes to go. Sorry, I did not keep us on time. I think it's been a really valuable conversation. Do we want to kind of like think of other, if, you know, if there are other like major goals that we want to like introduce into the conversation and kind of like, you know, vote up or down and see if we can get to, you know, if you know, 3 seems like a good number to hold on to. Do we want to like start going down the, you know, thinking about what we need to do in order to, what kind of prioritization we need to make in order to make sure that we're, you know, kind of efficiently working towards those goals? How do people want to spend these next few minutes?
I think that something that should be mentioned here is something that Justin brought up in our team meeting a couple of weeks ago, and that Sarah also touched on, is whether we see ourselves as responding to a moment or as contributing to an archive. Those goals sometimes compete, and I think we were talking about that in our team meeting a couple weeks ago. And Sarah gave a really good description of like supporting, like documenting a record of what has changed and contesting a shifting baseline. So, I mean, I think that that's valuable to highlight while we're thinking about how we want to prioritize things. I don't think it's necessarily a different thing to introduce. I just want to be sure that we are thinking about that when we think about things like synthesis.
Yeah, and I think that synthesis, in some ways, I think that synthesis work can really do both of those things, and that, you know, both the you know, creating an archive. I really like the phrasing that contesting a shifting baseline, and also like, you know, pulling, you know, where we choose to highlight that synthesis, or where we choose to, you know, to do any sort of like kind of deeper dives within, you know, this broader analysis to kind of like, you know, demonstrate complexities, could also be then that like kind of responding to a moment where, because I do think that like understanding where the public interest lies is important in terms of like people, you know, we can put work out there, but in order for it to, you know, be impactful to people, also we have to take into account where, you know, where that interest is, to some extent, I think. Yeah, Eric?
I'm not an archivist, so I might get this wrong, but you know, my sense is that synthesis is essentially enhancing the value of our archive in some ways. I mean, it's producing a new archive that has some sort of value added to it, right? It's not just here's the pages that changed, but here's how they changed, and we're going to store this data and we're going to make it publicly available. But we're also going to contextualize it in a series of reports that speaks to the broader political moment. So for me, yeah, it's about keeping both goals in mind and making sure they weave together. And yeah, I also think yeah, anyway.
Maybe I can add something small to that. When it's both an archive and a research community working on top of that archive, the shape of what and how you store things changes, which is, I think, the evolution we've seen, especially if we start counting from Archivers 1.0, which was a lovingly built trash fire that wasn't very useful to anyone up to now. What it means to save the data changes as you decide what you want to do with it. And I think that's a really important part of what we are. If we are an archive, we're an archive with users of that archive attached.
I think that is a fantastic framing. Good visual. Okay, we're at an hour. I think this has been really useful, and I will clean up and synthesize this doc and share it out. And then I think, next steps are also to have a, meeting with those folks who couldn't make it to this one, to, share the recording, and also record that meeting. And then over the course of the next few team meetings, figuring out what are these, what are our steps to make sure that we're working toward these goals. But I think it's been really productive. Thank you so much for coming and sharing thoughts. And it seems like we're really pretty on the same page, which is fantastic.
Great. Thank you, Gretchen. Thanks, everybody. And glad that Kelsey could sit into this.
Yes, thanks.
meeting too.
All right, thanks so much, all. Happy Friday and happy weekend.
Take care.
Next
Thank you.
Everybody.
Yeah.
See ya.
Bye, Amelia.